this my house.
It's a Friday once again.
Hello, my fellow freaks, and welcome back to the channel. I hope you have all had a great week. It finally happened. I finally moved. I finally moved, and oh my god, has it been so chaotic. And also let me apologize, because me just sitting here talking, I hear the echo. I hear the echo in the room. I apologize for any potential like shitty audio that this video may have because of this echo. It will be fixed. It is not something that I can immediately fix. In fact, we have moved enough to be able to officially live in this new place, but we don't even have all of our stuff yet. So technically I'm not done moving. I still have more to do this weekend. I'm just fucking thankful to finally be in this bitch. It has been a very long and difficult process, but here we are. And as I have mentioned from last week, pretty much every single movie that we are about to watch for the rest of our summer in Tromaville, they are all films that I have not heard of before getting into Troma cinema, the Troma genre, the Troma sphere, whatever you want to call it. And because I haven't heard of many of these titles, a lot of them actually came from viewers like you. At some point last year, whenever I announced that I wanted to do a summer in Tromaville, many of you gave me recommendations for some of the very best Troma films to watch for the summer. And this week's film came to my attention from the viewer Ain't Doing It Right. Thank you very much. As you know, I always appreciate your recommendations, and I usually always like them as well. But the only thing that I gathered about this week's film before going into it is, oh, it's going to be a war movie. And I basically just got that idea from the poster. I'm pretty sure I did read like the short summary synopsis snippet that's on IMDb, but upon coming up to actually watching this movie, I didn't remember what it was. Just saw the poster and was like, oh, it's going to be a war film. And here's the thing, I'm not completely opposed to war movies. Like, I like war movies. I don't have anything against them at all, but it's not exactly like the first genre that I would pick, you know? I usually end up enjoying them, but it's not my top pick. Nothing against them, just, you know. However, this film ended up being literally nothing that I expected in the slightest. Because where I was expecting just like a regular old war film, like a B-movie war flick, what I got instead was this incredibly dark, disturbing, and depressing depiction of a Vietnam War veteran suffering with poverty and PTSD. And that film is Combat Shock from 1986 and directed by Buddy Giovinazzo. I am not joking when I say that this might be one of the darkest, bleakest, and most disturbing films that I have come across yet. And it's distributed by Troma. What? Honestly though, this ended up being like a really pleasant surprise for me because, as I said, I like war movies, I'll watch them, I have nothing against them, but they are not my first choice. So the fact that Combat Shock immediately subverted my expectations and was more than just a war movie, but it instead kind of covered a topic that I feel a little passionate about. Well, it made the film a lot more interesting, and I really appreciated that it was shedding light on a message or a topic that I feel is very important, which is the mistreatment and abandonment of veterans. But first, before we get into any of that, if you are new here, hi, my name is STARGUTZZZ. I would say any running, crashing loud noises you hear in the background are my cats, but I am in an office where I can close my door now, so I feel like I don't have to say that anymore. Although I will say there is a cat on my lap right now, and that's why I cannot move my left arm. My movie reviews tend to be more of a discussion over elements that I find to be good or bad about a film, rather than just giving you the straight play-by-play of every single little thing that happens in it. So in other words, I refrain from spoilers as much as possible, but they will arise as they pertain to the discussion I'd like to have with the movie. If you would like to watch Combat Shock before or after this review, let me hold on. Let me give you a few content warnings, because as I said, this is maybe one of the most depressing and just bleak and dark films that I have ever watched. If you go into this movie, you will encounter subject matters such as self-harm, drug abuse, child prostitution. Just think about any and every heavy, dark topic that you possibly can, and it is probably in this movie. Just overall depressing subject matter. Norman, I believe it's possible if you're just a person who is suffering from severe depression, or even if you are a veteran suffering with PTSD. This has to do with the Vietnam War. I think it could potentially be triggering to anyone who has war experience and the after effects of being in a war. And when I use the word triggering for this movie, I do mean it in the very traditional definition of the term. If you are not aware, the term triggering or to be triggered was actually initially used for war veterans suffering with PTSD, and that triggering or being triggered was a name that they used for the reaction, the response that happens from something that reminds them of their time in the war. I am not the best at describing this because I, didn't specialize in psychology, but I am aware of how the term started. So in the very traditional sense of the word, I do think combat shock could trigger somebody. And we'll get into the specifics of that later, of why, because it is a very scarily realistic depiction of what Vietnam veterans suffered and went through after the war, after coming home. But all that later. All of this to say that big content warnings for combat shock. Anything dark, depressing that you can think of, it's probably here. And if you have a problem with that, maybe sit the movie out. But if you don't have a problem with that, then you can watch Combat Shock for free on platforms such as Plex and Fossum. Unfortunately, it is not on our very good best friend Tubi. However, I think I will provide the Plex link in the comments, in the description down below, just so it is that much easier for you to go out and watch this film. I'm sorry, I hate Fossum. I hate anytime I've had to use Fossum, I really hate it. So I'm gonna put the Plex link, but also if you have a subscription to either Prime Video or AMC Plus, those are also some options. But anyway, with all of those pleasantries out of the way, let us jump right into this review. Combat Shock, in many ways, feels more like an experience the audience helplessly watches than a film with a conventional plot. While the film touches on very serious and heavy subject matter, the story itself is incredibly simple and straightforward. The audience simply watches a day in the life of the main character Frankie's life. Frankie, who is a Vietnam War veteran experiencing extreme poverty and suffering with PTSD as a result of the government's and society's mistreatment and abandonment of war veterans. Combat Shock explores the most uncomfortable and unsavory aspects of Frankie's life in order to highlight the raw and unspoken reality that many homeless and mentally disturbed veterans in America face. And, unfortunately, how many of these real-life stories end. While to some, Combat Shock may come across as pure shock value content, it is depressingly accurate in its portrayal of Frankie and those he comes across, and it holds a serious message that often goes ignored within America's society: the abandonment of veterans, especially after the Vietnam War. As I already said, I was expecting just a war movie. I thought we were going to be on the battlefield, not, what happens after the battlefield. It was a very pleasant surprise, a very welcome surprise, because honestly, this is kind of an issue that I find myself to be very passionate about. I am not going to get into it right now because I have an entire section covering how this film depicts not only the government's treatment of soldiers, but society's treatment of soldiers as well. And because of that, I feel like this is a video that could potentially cross the line with some people, because it is popular to hate America nowadays, and that hatred of America extends towards the military. Now listen, I don't like the government. Who does? I fucking hate the government. However, I do not subscribe to extending that hate towards the soldiers and troops that help keep us safe. And I do believe a lot of the hatred that people, especially like in my generation, feel towards the military or specifically troops, because let me say, I can't get behind hatred of like high up military personnel. I get that, but I will not do it for the soldiers. I'm sorry. I I understand too much of how so many people get into that situation. And then I also come from an understanding of what the government itself does to its own soldiers. And I think a lot of the hatred just comes from not knowing that and assuming that every single soldier is like a dirty bootlicker. And, you know, just not knowing that the government themselves treat soldiers like fucking guinea pigs. They shoot them up with anything. They do like experiments and tests on them. They're exposed to like toxic chemical waste without any care. They drink chemical waste. Like, I have a whole section prepared on it. I cannot get into it right now. But basically, I feel very passionate over the fact that the government takes in like freshly 18-year-old boys and makes them sign away their lives and then throws them out into the fucking street once their bodies are spent. You know? So obviously I think you can tell that I have a lot prepared for discussing this film, and I am very excited to rant and rave about it. However, I feel like it would be very irresponsible of me if I did not at least give you guys a heads up of the one and only con that I have with this movie, like the one and only complaint that I have, and it is the pacing. I will be the very first one to admit that the pacing of this movie, it's very slow. It's extremely slow. Now, some of these slow moments, it's like 50-50. There are some of these slow moments that actually feel like slow burns, and it feels very prominent towards the little plot that we have going on. They feel like proper slow burns. The other 50% of these slow-paced moments are just like completely unnecessary filler with the most like wacky, ridiculous B-movie soundtrack ever. Like, the soundtrack is so totally different from what is happening in the film. So it can get very boring to watch at times, and it can feel very drawn out at moments. Some of the slowness, it feels like an actual proper slow burn, such as like the interactions or the interaction between Frankie and his father. Meanwhile, other ones like Frankie just walking around, or like seeing 3 different shots of Frankie standing in line outside of the unemployment office. Yeah, that feels a little bit like filler to me. So I am about to praise this movie a whole lot because I have really kind of fallen in love with it. But like I said, I feel like it would be irresponsible for me to do all this ranting and raving and not at least give you guys a heads up that like, hey, it's very, very slow. Although despite all of the slow pacing, some of the filler moments, the unnecessary, like just extensive walking scenes with the goofy ass repetitive B-movie soundtrack playing in the background. Despite all of that, I feel like this movie is extremely worth sitting through. It is especially worth sitting through as we approach the film's finale, which obviously I'm not going to share what it is, but the finale makes everything worth it. At least to me. Let me disclose, not everyone will feel that way, but to me, the ending was worth it. There are very many real life aspects that are included within Combat Shock that make it very depressing and disturbing and difficult to watch. However, put all of those like disturbing, unsavory, realistic aspects of life and combine it with an environment and an atmosphere that feels like it came directly out of the mind of David Lynch, and you start to get something that feels a little bit unnerving, unsettling, and maybe uncanny in a way. Now, yeah, it's time to talk about the baby. If you don't want to know anything about the baby, right now is a perfect time to drop out. But the baby does happen so early on that I don't really feel like I consider it a spoiler personally, but I have to talk about the baby, obviously, right? Because I've mentioned David Lynch on my first watch during the opening, whenever Frankie wakes from his nightmare, and we hear like this really weird, it sounds like an alien baby crying. And he sits up to it, it wakes him up, but then he just lays back down in bed and lets the woman deal with it. And that moment, I was already like, ha ha ha, oh, Eraserhead, ha ha ha. I remember when like, there was a moment when Henry did that and, you know, ha ha ha, Eraserhead. But then the baby got revealed and I was like, oh, this really is Eraserhead. This is actually literally Eraserhead. And then I started to see more scenes between the baby and the mother, Kathy, and so many of them match up with interactions between Mary and the Eraserhead baby that I was just like, okay, please tell me I'm not crazy, that this is definitely like a more Americanized version of Eraserhead. I noticed a few reviews that said this was like a combination of Eraserhead and Taxi Driver. I unfortunately have something to admit that I know Taxi Driver is one of those big movies and I have still yet to see it. So I cannot tell you how much this is or is not like Taxi Driver, but a lot of people have said it, so it has to be true, I guess. However, within the catalog of films that I have seen, what I would compare it to is, I would say it's like the love child of Eraserhead and Gummo. And also because I went into this film, you know, expecting it to just be a war movie. I thought it was gonna actually be on the battlefield. I'm glad that it's not. I'm glad that this is the direction that it went. But because I was expecting it to be like on a battlefield, I figured this might be a little bit more of a serious feature. So how are we going to get any kind of like Troma toxic green in here? Now, Combat Shock is not actually made by Troma. It is distributed by Troma. So I was just like, well, then it's probably not gonna have any like toxic green goo or anything toxic happening in this, especially it's a war movie. What kind of toxic green goo could we possibly see? And then when the baby showed up, I was proven wrong because that motherfucker's eyes are green and there's just like green all over its mouth. So congrats. Somehow the toxic green Troma goo has made its way into this B movie, which isn't even it's distributed. Anyway, all this to say that I was impressed that somehow, some way, some possibility, the toxic green Troma goo made its way into this movie. I'm very happy to see that there are other people who see the Eraserhead-ness of this film, because listen, I feel like it is very common for me to throw out the word Lynchian, like something feels very Lynchian. It reminds me of Eraserhead. I feel like I maybe mention Eraserhead at least once a month on the channel. And because I mention it so much, sometimes I feel crazy for mentioning it because I'm just like, am I just being obsessed with Eraserhead, or is this true? Like, do other people see it too? And I'm very, very happy to see that so many other people agree that Combat Shock is very Eraserhead. However, it's more than just the baby, the deformed weird baby, that's giving this film the Eraserhead vibe. It is the entire ambiance of the film. Yes, as I mentioned, there are moments that we can literally parallel with Eraserhead, but something that stood out to me a lot, like way more than just the deformed baby, was the use of background noise. There are so many scenes that have this like ambient background noise happening, whether it's like buzzing or crickets. The buzzing and crickets especially are background noises that we hear in Eraserhead. And there are elements that really help to like establish the tone of the film, as well as create like an atmosphere that really encapsulates the viewer into the world of the film, at least in my opinion. Some of you already know this, and others may be new here and not know it, but Eraserhead is one of those films that I find to be like pretty disturbing, in my opinion. And the reason that I find Eraserhead to be so disturbing is because its ambiance and its use of the background noise, its atmosphere, how it builds this like unnerving environment that the audience is stuck in. And part of building this environment is just like the white noise, the buzzing, the crickets. Like, that is one of the things that stands out to me about Eraserhead that makes me feel disturbed. So in regards to Combat Shock, the fact that it is combining the already disturbing, dark, depressing content with an equally disturbing and unnerving atmosphere, it is just magnificent. It is everything I could have dreamed of. It is so absolutely perfect. It feels like I am getting the best of both worlds when it comes to disturbing cinema with this film, because I'm getting like actually dark, disturbing, like traditionally disturbing content alongside the more abstract, disturbing content that I typically find myself disturbed by. It's just, God, it is so beautiful. It is a dream come true for me. This film is delectable. The combination of a serious and heavy topic with the actual thoughtful artistic expression, I'm gonna make the call right now. Send it out into the universe over the fact that in some way, somehow, Combat Shock needs to be in the Criterion Collection. I know Troma owns it. I know it is distributed by Troma. I don't know the logistics of like a film being owned by, I don't know. What, does it matter what kind of film company owns a film for it to be part of the Criterion Collection? I doubt it. I don't, some way, somehow, this, I am begging. Combat Shock needs to be in the Criterion Collection, especially when I start talking about all of the realisticness of it in the next section. And listen, I think that the universe is actually going to answer my call, because the last film that I begged to be a part of the Criterion Collection was Desperate Living. And guess what the fuck is now in the Criterion Collection? So please, Combat Shock is more than deserving to be in that collection. This is such an incredible film. Now, before I get on my soapbox in the next section, I do just want to highlight one teeny tiny Lynchian detail that I liked a lot, which I unfortunately can't go into too much detail on, but it's literally just the two scenes that are regarding the TV in Kathy and Frankie's living room. Both when Kathy is attempting to watch TV and when the TV speaks to Frankie towards the end, both of these moments to me felt very surreal and very Lynchian. Now, the Kathy example, it's a little more of a comic relief, I would argue, but at the same time, there's something that feels like a dream about it. In fact, I'll play a clip of what is happening in this scene. So the goofy like casualness of these two people like repeating each other's names, and Kathy is just sitting there like very blankly watching a static television. I don't know why that came across so Lynchian to me. I guess it felt a little bit like Rabbits for some reason in a way. But the second scene with the TV, when the TV speaks to Frankie, such a short moment, such a teeny tiny little moment that I am so utterly obsessed with. It was almost like a perfect way to kick off the madness that ensues in those final moments of the film. And also, speaking of those final moments of the film, I want to take a short moment to just applaud Rick Giovanazzo, who I assume is the director's brother. This is the best Troma It's distributed by Troma. I have to remember that. It's not really a Troma film, but it kind of is. I don't know. But anyway, this is the best acting, the most serious best acting I've seen of all the Troma films. Rick Giovinazzo does such an incredible job depicting Frankie, and especially in these last moments, his acting is so, it's kind of scary. He does such a remarkable job in this role, and I just wanted to mention that. A guy who is probably only in this because he's the director's brother and it's a low budget B movie. It's one of the best acting performances I have literally ever seen. As I have expressed earlier, Combat Shock actually covers a topic, a subject, a message that I find myself to be extremely passionate about. And it is going to be an issue that I understand not everyone is going to share my opinion on, and that not everyone is going to agree on me with, which is fine. As I said, it is popular to hate America nowadays, and that extends to the military, and I'll be honest, I understand that it is not without reason. I hate the government. I will go as far as to hating upper military personnel. But when it comes to the soldiers who are actually fighting in these rich man wars, as I like to call them, when it comes to the soldiers themselves, I just cannot find any hatred whatsoever in my heart for those individuals. And I think it's because I do come from a background where I've interacted with a lot of veterans, so I get a whole other side to it, or I have knowledge of what veterans experience both when they are still in service and after they've left. And so because I have that experience, I can't hate the troops. But there are a lot of people who very easily can, and I have seen several people, unfortunately also people who are very close to me, who, you know, say things that like the troops should die. They do deserve to have PTSD, and that they should kill themselves after, you know, returning home from war. I feel like there are people who just get very, very hostile and have absolutely no sympathy or empathy in their hearts for the people who are like sacrificing their lives and damaging their bodies and their psyche in order to keep us safe. Personally, to me, I believe that a lot of this hatred or lack of sympathy that people have towards troops, it comes from a place of not understanding exactly what soldiers go through, how they get recruited, how they get treated once they're in there, what happens to them after they leave. I just think it just comes from not truly understanding. I have a memory of like some years ago, it's probably been like close to 10 years now. I remember some Twitter post of somebody saying that like people who are in the military who serve, they all deserve to get PTSD. And I'm sorry, I just can't subscribe to that, because they are the real people you should hate is the government, okay? Like, the soldiers are the little pawns that they use so that they don't have to get their own hands dirty. And also, you know, if it weren't for them, then you wouldn't be able to lay comfortably in bed on your iPhone typing hateful shit on Twitter. You know, it's a subject that is kind of close to me, and I'm not afraid to admit that. Now, for Frankie and for Combat Shock specifically, it is a very unique experience of how specifically Vietnam veterans were treated once they got home from the Vietnam War. And this one, they were treated so much differently because they didn't win. They were not celebrated once they got home, and not only did the government hate them, but like all of society hated them. Vietnam vets, I think, were perhaps the worst treated upon coming home. However, although Combat Shock is specifically covering like the experience of the Vietnam vet, it also still covers another issue that exists amongst soldiers and veterans today. And that is basically how the government exploits them and turns them into guinea pigs. Also, I feel like do people not understand how like the government recruits soldiers. I mean, they target low income, low education areas, and usually the community in general in these areas really enforce that the only option young boys have after high school is the military. And then once they're there and once they're signed up, not only, as I said, are they little pawns in a rich man's war, but they become very easy test subjects for literally anything the government is trying to make. When I say that they are treated like guinea pigs, I mean they are literally treated like guinea pigs, scientific guinea pigs. And the government, the military, has that right, has that power over them. How many of you watch King of the Hill? And how many of you are familiar with the episode where Bill finds out that the reason for his weight gain and his hair loss is because during his time in the military, they were giving him experimental shots. I remember that episode where they discuss how Bill was basically a test subject. And guess what? That is not just a funny concept for an episode of King of the Hill that Mike Judge came up with. That's real. That actually happens. It is far too common for soldiers to line up against a wall and be administered a shot that they don't know anything about. And if they attempt to refuse to take that shot, if they put up a fight, have fun with that dishonorable discharge, buddy. Soldiers, they get so exploited. They just get such a shit end of the deal, because not only are they test subjects and guinea pigs and pawns for the government, but then society also hates them because they're the ones fighting in wars. And in the case of the Vietnam War, if you don't come home as the winner, society wants nothing to do with you. But of course, nowadays there are people in society where even if you did win, they also want nothing to do with you. Now, when it comes to like the experiments and stuff, I theorize that we do see a little bit of it in Combat Shock. Combat Shock more so covers Frankie's exposure to toxic chemicals and his baby being an Agent Orange baby. But there are scenes of Frankie in a hospital, and he's held captive in this military hospital for I think like 2 or 3 years before his release, getting shot up and tested on. And we don't get to see a whole lot of it as an audience, but I do feel like the tone surrounding these moments of Frankie in the hospital do feel very sinister and suspicious. And of course, you know, I do theorize that the nurse is not shooting him up with morphine. Maybe she is, but...
After my release, I was committed to a hospital for 3 years.
What's that?
It's morphine. It'll help relieve the pain.
But I'm not in any pain.
Well, then it's doing its job, isn't it?
But I'm okay now.
It is not only Combat Shock's depiction of the treatment of soldiers and vets that is very scarily accurate, but its general depiction of extreme poverty, homelessness, and addiction as well. While we do mostly focus on Frankie and how he struggles with unemployment and PTSD after the Vietnam War, we also get a varying perspective of Frankie's friend Mike, who I believe was also in the Vietnam War and is coping with his PTSD a little differently. Frankie is seen trying to get money to feed his family. Meanwhile, Mike is trying to get money for heroin. Although I'll be honest, it's not really the drug addiction that I want to highlight here. Instead, it's something that Mike says that defines his mindset within his circumstance. And it is a mindset that many in a homeless situation may end up having over the course of being homeless, that also holds a very unfortunate truth behind it.
Mike, it's not the way to do things. You're gonna wind up in jail.
What choices do I have? I'll take my chances. I need $100 a day to survive. Where am I gonna get money like that? You think I like doing this? I'm better off in jail.
I'm better off in jail. Why would Mike say that he is better off in jail than homeless on the street starving? Well, put yourself in his shoes for a second and really think about it. Even outside of the fact of being a, veteran suffering with PTSD, just take it from this perspective of someone being homeless in general. You don't have a guaranteed roof over your head. You're starving. And the longer that you don't have your bare necessities met, the more desperate you're going to get to try and fill them. And for some people, this means, doing a few misdemeanors. Why would somebody who is homeless commit a crime? Well, if you are arrested and jailed, that means that you now have a free roof over your head and guaranteed meals every day. As fucked up as it sounds, it is a sad reality in America, even right now. There are people out there who are homeless and starving, and they purposefully get themselves arrested on the chance that they can stay in jail for X amount of time. Because being in jail for that amount of time means they get a roof, they get meals, they get a shower, they basically get taken care of. You can say it's fucked up all you want, but it's the truth. People do that. There are people who will even once they're released, they will almost immediately commit another crime to try and go back because that's home now. I mean, honestly, if you had to choose, would you choose being homeless on the street or being in jail and basically being taken care of by the government? It is a very real perspective on the situation that I was very surprised to see happen or to see represented in this movie. I mean, in general, within every heavy topic that Combat Shock tackles, it does so in a very serious and very realistic way. Even the part that I think people would argue is shock value, which are the child prostitutes. Unfortunately, those girls are depicted in a pretty realistic manner, and as sad as it is, people are living that life right now. This was made in the 80s. It's made to represent veterans struggling with poverty and PTSD, and yet a lot of the stuff happening in this are their lives that are currently being lived now in 2026. Yeah, it's uncomfortable, yeah, it's disturbing, but guess what? Life is uncomfortable and disturbing. And while I knew its representation of how veterans are treated had to be pretty realistic, I didn't realize how truly realistic they were until I read some reviews on Combat Shock. Now, I usually when I look at reviews, I look on IMDb, and that is the source that I skimmed for this. However, I don't know why, I had a gut feeling to check the Amazon reviews. I found 2 reviews that are written by actual Vietnam vets. Now, could they be lying on the internet? Duh. However, I don't see any reason for them to lie about this in a random Amazon review page on a obscure B movie from the 80s. You know what I mean? And these reviews really stood out to me because they made me realize how how realistic Combat Shock is, and I want to share those with you now. This first one is by Charles. I'll censor his last name just for privacy reasons. And he has stated, "I walked those streets after I returned home from being a rifle squad leader in the post-Vietnam era. Same moral injury, same indifference from the population, bad housing, job refusals, veterans not welcome. Fortunately, I had a better ending than the main character in this film, and I felt quite similarly." That was the first review that I saw, and I was just like, oh, that's very interesting that this guy even went as far as to walk the same streets when he came home. And he expresses he had the same moral injury, indifference from the population, bad housing. Nobody wanted anything to do with veterans after the Vietnam War. And then I found this second review, which is made by an anonymous person. And they go into a little bit more detail. And see, this is the reason. I think this review in particular is the reason why I state that Combat Shock could genuinely be triggering for war veterans. This reviewer has titled his review, Too Close for Comfort, and he states, "This is not a polished big budget film with wonderful acting, so do not expect it to be. That aside, it was like watching an extreme dramatization of my transition from the US Army paratroops to the civilian nightmare I had returned to on the North Shore of Staten Island during the 1970s. Way too close for comfort. I walked the same Port Richmond streets, the same fields, the same train stations. Avoided unsavory people like the nasty ones in the movie. I stood in the line at the same unemployment office. The clerk told me about the same lines in real life that the clerk character spoke. Obviously, I didn't do up to the same finale as the main character did, but the thought, and I knew other vets back then and there who didn't make it. This movie is entirely disturbing. I cannot say I think this is a great film, however, I lived a good part of it, and it reminded me how bad it was then, and how fortunate I am today for surviving and thriving." That's the review that got to me. Like, the fact that this person basically lived Frankie's life to the extent of standing in line at the same exact unemployment office that is shown in the film. When I discovered these reviews, this is like really what propelled Combat Shock into being a movie that I feel extremely passionate about and love, okay? I think it speaks volumes that the fact that Combat Shock is so realistic of a depiction of the treatment and abandonment of Vietnam vets that there are Vietnam veterans that are watching this movie and are stating, I lived the same exact life. They resonate with Frankie. They see their past in Frankie. They see friends who didn't make it in Frankie. It's insane. And again, it speaks volumes that this movie did its job. It did exactly what it came to do, in my opinion. If you were getting actual Vietnam vets saying that they resonate with this, to the fact that they walked to the same locations, been to the same locations, been to the same unemployment office, that is insane to me. That is what really bumped the score of this movie up for me, and I knew it had to be fairly accurate in its depiction. However, I didn't know it would be so accurate that Vietnam veterans would respond this way to it. And again, this is why I think this could be potentially a truly triggering film for anyone, war people who are struggling with PTSD. Overall though, I could literally go on and on and on about the elements and details of this weird low budget film that I thought was going to be a war flick, but ended up being a very serious, dark, bleak, disturbing film with a serious, genuine message behind it. Like there's still so much that I have not gotten to talk about. Like, one of my favorite quotes is this moment between Frankie and his dad, and I think it makes more of an impact if you actually hear it watching the movie. But basically he's in this phone call with his dad, and his dad doesn't want to return to the past because it hurts too much. And Frankie responds by saying, "I go back every day, Dad." And that line broke my heart. That's one of my favorite moments of the film because it's very painful and very disturbingly real. You know, somebody who is a war vet suffering with PTSD, they do go back every day. They don't have the choice. I could have included an entire section just discussing every detail of this short interaction between Frankie and his dad and the contrasts between them. There's just, oh my God, so much that I just can't put into like a 30 to 40 minute video. And I was very surprised to be watching something so dark and morbid and bleak and disturbing within our summer in Tromaville. Troma, who is mostly known for like poop humor and toxic goo and crazy special effects. You do still get crazy special effects here when they arise, but it's not so like bam, 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 cartoony, classic Troma film. Combat shock is one of the most just bleak. I think bleak is a very good word for combat shock. It is just like one of the bleakest and most disturbing films that I have ever come across. But I do greatly welcome it. Like, I obviously didn't hate this at all. I am happy over the fact that it's not just your standard war film. It's tackling an issue that gets ignored in America. It was ignored in the Vietnam War, and arguably it kind of gets ignored now too. But for the time that it came out, it was definitely tackling some important and more at-home issues in the 80s of Vietnam veterans experiencing things such as homelessness, mistreatment, drug addiction, PTSD, poverty, societal abandonment, like just the list goes on. I honestly, genuinely went into this movie kind of thinking that I wouldn't be too crazy about it. I would probably just think it's okay, you know? However, I have ended up being very much in love with it and very much impressed by it, to the point that I am going to scream to the heavens how this needs to be in the Criterion Collection. I don't know. Just give more attention to combat shock. And as I said earlier, I love that it combines the two aspects of disturbing that I usually discuss on the channel. This disturbing that is like very grotesque and shocking, along with the disturbing that's a little bit more subtle and atmospheric. It combines both of those, and it just makes it it's perfect. What tier am I gonna put it on? I think it's no surprise what tier I'm gonna put this on, since I've been ranting and raving this whole video. Obviously, combat shock is getting the A tier. I initially wanted to place it at B tier due to the very slow pacing and like very unnecessary filler content throughout. Like, I get it, it has very boring moments. It is extremely slow paced, and some of the slow pacing is necessary and good slow burn stuff. A lot of other of it is like Frankie walking and there's really weird music in the background. So initially I did want to give it a B. However, when I found those reviews and I found out how much Vietnam veterans actually resonate with the movie and had the same exact experiences as Frankie, again, to the point of being at the very same locations as Frankie, I feel like the film deserves to be a higher score, an A, for basically fulfilling its purpose. I feel like it speaks volumes over the fact that it seems like the purpose or the goal of this was to highlight that mistreatment and abandonment that Vietnam veterans experienced after the war. And then the fact that actual Vietnam veterans resonate so much with it, this movie did its job. If I don't move it up to S tier later, I would be shocked. But for the moment, I will put it in A. I know I'm very passionate, I'm very excited. I do kind of want to put it in S tier, but I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna sit on it. Just don't be surprised, because I really do think this is Criterion worthy. And with that, we are done with yet another movie review. Thank you guys so much if you stayed around all the way until the very end. If you like this video, please make sure that you stab that like button. It is a free and easy way to help support this channel. Also, is there a movie that you would just love to hear my opinion on? Put it down in the comments and maybe it'll show up in a future video. Also, did you like this video just so much that you would like to hear me ramble about more Troma films, disturbing cinema, B movies, weird 2B films? I also cover fantasy sometimes. If you would just like to hear me ramble about more movies in general, please consider hitting that subscribe button and the bell icon so you can be notified every time I make a new upload, which new uploads are every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and on the screen are some of my socials. Unfortunately, this weekend I cannot go live because I am going to be trying to move some more stuff into this place. However, if you're desperate for more STARGUTZZZ content, right here is the live channel and it's linked in the description below. There is a backlog of former streams if you just need more STARGUTZZZ content in your life, and we should be back to live streaming within a week. I might do a surprise live stream sometime next week, so maybe look out for that. And now just one final thank you so much for staying all the way until the very end. Our time here is precious, and the fact that you have sat here and listened to me ramble about how the government exploits and mistreats their soldiers and uses them as guinea pigs, and how fucked up, just thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time and the time you spent to sit here and watch this video. It does really mean the world to me. If I do not see you in a surprise live stream this next week, then I will see you in the next video. But until then, please have a great night and stay safe out there.